Hello everyone, I'm Shannon Turner and I'm going to be presenting on a presentation that I gave at ClientCon 2019 on mailing wrappers and template blocks. So let's jump right in. Wrappers are what control the layout and look and feel of a mailing. You'll notice that these two mailings have identical content, but they look very different. These two mailings also have the exact same content as the previous two, but they also look very different. So all four mailings are the same. Each of them looks very different logos, different styling, different headers and footers, different link colors, and backgrounds. All you need to do in order to change this, change the look and feel of your mailing, is to change the wrapper in the compose screen of your mailing. So choose the wrapper that you want from the drop-down menu. The wrappers that you have available to you are going to be different than the ones you see in this particular drop-down menu in these slides, because of course you have wrappers that have been created specifically for your style and branding. That might not be anything new to you, but I thought it would be a good idea to lay that foundation before we dig into making our own wrappers. So let's make our own. From the Mailings tab, we want to expand the content menu in the sidebar and choose email wrappers. I think the best way to learn how to make a wrapper is to use an existing wrapper as a starting point, and we'll be able to see exactly how it works and change the code as we go, and then see what changes that actually ends up making. So let's start by copying the template with sidebar wrapper. Click copy as highlighted in red here, and the first two things that you're going to see once you've done that are the name and the template code itself. Let's name our new wrapper something that won't be confused for a wrapper that anyone should use. Maybe something like test wrapper in your name. So I'd do like test Shannon wrapper in all caps. The text template is for customizing a text-only mailing. I would recommend leaving this blank because ActionKit will then generate a plain text email. But if you don't want to do that, you can edit your plain text email here. Most clients leave this alone, and only a tiny number of users receive plain text only email, so I'm not going to spend any more time on this. Unsubscribe text is required, and the default shown here will include a file called unsubscribe.txt that allows people who wish to unsubscribe a way to do that. And this is the box for plain text or text-only emails to add an unsubscribe link. This is the box for HTML, or in other words, most emails. You can customize this, but as a reminder, you must provide an easy way for people to unsubscribe if they wish, and the link cannot be obfuscated in any way. You'll probably leave this alone. This is like the bulk of what we're going to be doing here today, is working in this template. And of all of those screenshots that we just saw, we're probably only going to be working in the template. Nothing else really matters all that much. I should mention that this training requires a bit of HTML know-how in order to get the most out of this. If you don't have a lot of familiarity with HTML, that's okay, but it'll definitely help. If you have a little CSS know-how, that'll help too. One other thing I should mention and caution you against is don't click the visual mode here. Keep your editor in code view, otherwise you could lose some code changes to your CSS. This particular wrapper has 10 major components that we'll walk through together, and I will go through everything step by step so that it's as clear and as uncomplicated as we can make it. If you make changes to any of these components, you'll see those changes reflected in any mailings that use this wrapper. First, let's talk about the CSS, the styling. The HTML controls the structure of a web page, so how things are laid out and arranged on a page. But CSS controls the style of a web page, so how things look, like the font color or the spacing between objects and sections, how wide or tall an object or section is. And CSS occurs between this HTML style tag or sometimes in line in an HTML element, as we see highlighted in yellow here. So CSS code that's up top inside the style tags, that applies to the entire page. This inline CSS highlighted in yellow here, that is applied only to a single HTML element. And since a lot of times when you're writing mailing HTML, you're going to be using a lot of inline CSS, so I thought it would be important to mention. I should let you know that HTML and CSS for email is much more limited compared to HTML and CSS for the web. Some tags that you are used to and some CSS styles that you're used to do not work, or they do not work for most email clients. They work for some, but not others. I will give you resources later on how to test for these sorts of things, but just keep it in mind for now. And I do want to really emphasize that this is not an ActionKit limitation. This is a limitation of the various email clients. This has nothing to do with ActionKit. It's simply that Outlook, for instance, will render your emails just a little bit differently than Gmail will, for instance. And even, Gmail looks a little bit different on your iPhone versus your Android phone versus the desktop. So every email client has its own quirks, and using a different mailer like MailChimp, for instance, will not get you around these limitations. It's the mail clients themselves. For example, here is a list of a handful of email clients and which ones support style tags at the top of your mailing. At the end of this presentation, I'll give you a link where you can check the compatibility for yourself, but you can see that on desktop it has a lot of support, but not so much on mobile and also not on AOL mail. So if you have a lot of people on your list who are using AOL webmail, then style tags up in the top of your mailing, they might not be able to actually see what changes those are making. This is just for illustration, and you'll want to do lots of tests for compatibility before you start using your wrapper every day. But let's move on for now. The next big component of this wrapper is preview text. On the compose screen of your mailing, you can set some preview text. Preview text is what appears as the preview after the subject line, but before the beginning of your email shows. And it doesn't actually show up in the body of your mailing. I've highlighted the preview text in red here. Choose your training sessions by May 8th. So behind the scenes, here's the HTML code in the wrapper that actually makes that preview text appear. This is a mix of some snippet code that ActionKit uses plus some HTML. What this is saying is, if there is preview text, create a hidden element. Notice all the CSS in there that says, don't display this. It has a 0 font size, it has 0 height and 0 width. Put the preview text inside that. So it's invisible text that actually doesn't show up in your email itself. If you see this warning message saying that the email wrapper you've selected does not support preview text, this is the code that you need to add to your wrapper in order to make it available. You might also see this on a legacy email wrapper that was created before we added the preview text feature. The next major piece of code in this wrapper is the logo. The logo is an image embedded in a table, and that table has a gray background and a little bit of padding. The ActionKit logo is in the image, and you can change the URL here to match your own logo so that it says, your organization's logo instead of ActionKit. The next major component is the sidebar, and this is a massive piece of code, huge code block that I'm putting on this slide, not because I want you to read it, but because I want to illustrate that we're going to break this down. You see you can see that I've added a lot of extra spacing in here to make it kind of clearer how the hierarchy fits, but I really want to emphasize, don't worry about reading all of this code on the slide because that's not what's important. Just want to show it all at once and then break it down piece by piece. So the sidebar code starts with, is there any text in the sidebar text custom mailing field? Or is there a featured image for this mailing? Because if so, let's show the sidebar. This is the heart of the sidebar code, and there are 3 parts to it. So let's take a look at each of those parts individually. Anything you add into the sidebar text under content, that's going to get added right where it says include template, include TMPL, meaning include the template, custom fields, sidebar text. This next portion says, if there's an image selected in this featured image field, add it to the mailing. And this code that appears just under the sidebar text, that's where the image will go. This last part of the sidebar looks like a lot of code, but it's really just a lot of styling to make a link look like a button. So don't be intimidated by that. I want to call out 2 things to pay attention to here. First is this include template snippet. So what's it including? It's including customfields.link URL. Second thing I want to call out here is the take action. That's a good hint at what this code is and does. This is the code that makes the button and the link in the sidebar. You don't need a ton of HTML and CSS know-how in order to work backwards and figure out what this code does. It's a lot of inline styling around this specific link that sets the font to bold, 16 points or 16 pixels, and it has like a specific color, right? It's a red color. It has a little bit of a rounded edge. All of that is the CSS to turn that into a button. And of course we see the pattern here with the include template custom fields.link URL. That refers to the link URL text box that's on the compose screen. Here I've added in a link here, and if you were to go back and look at the full code, you would see that it says whatever link goes here, that's what the take action button is going to point to. So if we look here, that href, that is where should this link go to? Well, I want it to go to this link in the link URL. So let's look at the sidebar all together now. Remember how we said we would like to invite you, the best clients on earth, to register as our sidebar text? And then we included the photo of the earth as our featured image. And then if you were to click the Take Action button, you'd see that it goes to the ClientCon registration page as well. So that's the sidebar. All of that code that seemed really daunting on one slide, well, we broke it up and now it makes so much more sense. Compared to the sidebar, the main content block is pretty straightforward. The main content block appears just below the sidebar code, and all it is block content and block content. This is where your mailing body will go, and when you edit it on the compose screen, that's what gets inserted there. So the take action, you can have up to 2 take action buttons. We saw one in the sidebar, and there's another one below the main content. This looks like super complicated code, but we've actually seen it before, and it's just a lot of inline styling to make that link look like a nice rounded button. Exact same code that we saw in the sidebar to create the take action button, because it's the same button. It's just in a different place. So here you can see both of the take action buttons in this mailing, and of course, where do they link to? They link to whatever you put in that link URL field from a few slides ago. The next component of this Wrapper is the signature block, and this appears after the Take Action button. It checks to see, is there anything in the signature custom field? If so, then add sincerely and then whatever was entered into that field. Otherwise, leave it blank and don't even include a section for a signature. And here we can see what it looks like in our mailing. We have the signature block up top with, we type in whatever we want there, and then down below, this is what it looks like just above the just below the Take Action button. The references code is similar. If the references are not blank, then include whatever is present in the references custom field. And so here you can see that I've added in some references. A lot of clients will use these in their mailings to be able to show their work, so to speak, and give all of the different links and references to back up their claims that they're making in the mailing. And you can notice that you can use HTML in this particular references custom field, to add sources and links or even just bullet points. Here I have a numbered bullet point for each of my references. Next, let's take a look at the code that makes up the footer of the mailing, and we're going to break up the footer into lots of different parts. Specifically, this part in gray here, after all of the content, after the references, the part has all of these logos. First, let's look at this ActionKit logo. That's that image tag here. And so when you go to change this to your organization's logo, this is going to be what you're looking for. So don't forget also to change the width and the source of the image so that it reflects your logo. After that, here's the code that adds links to Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest. If you don't have a Pinterest, for example, you can just delete this third bit of code that has the link to the Pinterest, and it'll go away. The other ones that you keep, whichever ones you decide to keep, you'll want to make sure that you're customizing your links so that they go to your Facebook account and to your Twitter account. Same ideas for the links to Instagram and Tumblr and YouTube. This last bit of code has your address, city, state, zip, copyright notice, and most importantly, the unsubscribe block. Remember, you must have an unsubscribe block in your mailing wrapper, and it must be easy to unsubscribe from your list. Now, this may not be new to anyone, but just so we're all on the same page, how I was getting those screenshots of our mailing was by using the preview pane on the Compose screen just below my mailing body and all my custom mailing fields. If the preview pane isn't updating as it should, which sometimes it happens, you can click the Update Preview to force it to update. There's also the View Mobile Preview, which will show you what your mailing will look like on a phone. And finally, there's a small link to specify a user, which can be useful when you're testing complex snippets like targeting to someone's congressperson to make sure that your snippets and the flow of the mailing look correct. Be sure to take the time to see what your mailing will look like on a smaller screen, since lots of people will be reading your email from their phone. And the View Mobile Preview button that we saw on the last slide, that's an easy way to do that. So these two snippets of code, block content and end block content, and block unsubscribe, end block unsubscribe, these are built-in template blocks. They add specific functionality to your mailing, and they are required. The block content is what allows you to have a mailing body, so that's pretty important. And the unsubscribe block, of course, inserts a way for people to unsubscribe from your mailing. But you might be wondering, if they're built in and they're required, why do we show them to you at all? Why don't we just, put them in ourselves? Why do we require you to include them in your wrappers? The reason is so that you can customize the layout exactly the way that you want it. You control the full layout and styling of your mailing. Those were the built-in template blocks, but what about custom template blocks? We've seen a few examples of template blocks from a few slides ago, like the signature block or the references block. And remember that those also had some extra code around them to say, hey, only show the signatures if there's actually signatures to show. Same thing goes for the references. With these custom template blocks, this is going to be the main way that you are going to be extending the functionality of your mailing wrappers. Let's take a closer look now at the custom fields for signature and references, because once we've seen how those were made, we're going to have a better understanding of how to make our own. From the Mailings tab on the sidebar, let's expand data and go to custom mailing fields. Here we can see a list of all the custom mailing fields we have. These ones don't have any descriptions, but they really should. Descriptions are super helpful not only when you're looking at what custom mailing fields you have, but also when you're writing up your mailing, so you can leave hints for how to complete those fields correctly. Let's take a look at signature first. Wow, actually most of these fields aren't filled out at all. Let's just zoom in on the ones that are filled out. So we have just display name and the field type, and that's it. That's all that's filled out. And the reason I'm showing you this is to illustrate that it's not a huge involved process to make custom mailing fields. The bare minimum that you need is the name of the field and what type it is. The rest is just bonus bells and whistles, although you should add a description. And I'll show you some of those bells and whistles in a few slides, but for now, this custom mailing field is what makes this field, signature, appear on the compose screen of your mailing, which, since we have this code in our wrapper, is what makes this signature block appear in your mailing. Let's look at the same thing, but for references. Again, notice how most of these fields are blank. Let's zoom in. You'll notice that this looks a bit different from the signature field, and that's because the field type for this, the references, is HTML, and the signatures, that was just plain text. And now we see that the custom mailing field is what makes this references box appear on the compose screen of our mailings. Because it's the field type of HTML, it allows us, it has the line numbers, and it allows us to actually add HTML in there, which is super useful because we want an ordered list of our references. Maybe we also want links. And so that's why we can use that HTML, this bolded list of numbers, in our references field. So let's make our own custom mailing field. Here we have our mailing that we've built so far. Let's change the buttons that say Take Action so that we can add in our own text. Like for instance, sign up instead of take action. Sign up makes more sense here, since I want you to register for the ActionKit trainings. So let's figure out how to do that. Let's make our own custom mailing field. We'll start here on the custom mailing field screen. Remember, to get here, you go from the Mailings tab in the sidebar, under Data, find Custom Mailing Fields. Here's my new custom mailing field that I'm creating. I'm calling it Button Text, and I'm also adding a description because the description will show as help text on the compose screen to guide folks how to use it, what this means, and I even wrote out what it defaults to. That's super helpful. You should include a description. I'm also going to leave the field type as text here. You could customize the rest of this further, but I really like the rest of these settings. Just the defaults, I think they're very sensible. You usually don't want to make your custom mailing fields required. In some cases, there's a use for that. Sometimes you want to, but for the most part, I wouldn't. When we click Save, you can see a message up top that our field has been created. And you can see it in the list down below. Notice that it has description too. That's super useful. Now that we've created our new field, we need to add the code to our wrapper in order to get it to work. Here's the code that we used to have for the button. And with one small change, it now uses our custom field. But let's take a closer look at the code that we changed because it may not be super clear what we changed. Here are the 5 pieces of code. Number 1, if there's something in the custom field button text, number 2, then the button should read what was in the custom field button text. Otherwise, default to take action. And then end if ends this code snippet and says that we're done here. Remember, this is where you need to update your email wrapper. In your wrapper, under the template, and I should mention that there were 2 buttons. One was in the sidebar, and one was down below in the content. So make sure that you're making this replacement in both places. And you can refer back to the slides. I'll give you the link to the slides at the very end of this presentation so that you can also see, or you can just rewind a little bit to see the differences between those 2 slides. Once you've saved your email wrapper, then we're going to go back to our mailing. But before we do that, I want to call out the full page button, which is going to make it much easier to edit this code. Remember, keep things in code view or plain view, not visual. And let's confirm that we're using the right wrapper because otherwise it's definitely not going to show up. If your wrapper does not appear in this drop-down menu, refresh your compose screen and it should show up as long as you've saved your wrapper. This probably won't happen to you, but just in case, on the compose screen, if you don't see your button text field under content, you'll be able to find it under the custom mailing fields way down below at the bottom, just above the send proof section, but you probably won't run into this problem. Let's expand our custom mailing fields and choose the one that we want from the dropdown. You would find it under here, button text. We want to change the button text. And then I've set the button text that I want to be to say sign up. And you can notice that down there, there's also the help text to guide you as to what this actually does. Once you've saved, you can scroll up and check your preview pane to see, hey, actually it really did work. Now those buttons, instead of take action, they say sign up. This is maybe one of the more important slides here. So if you are having trouble or you're not seeing the results that you expect, run through this checklist to make sure that you didn't miss a step. So number 1, I created my custom mailing field. You do this one time and then you can reuse it again and again. Number 2, my wrapper has the code that includes the field that I just created. So you do that one time and then that wrapper, you can use it again and again. Every time you got to make sure that your mailing is using the correct wrapper. And then every time you got to make sure that you're adding that custom field to your mailing with the text in that you want. So if I don't add any text into my button text custom field, then of course it's going to default to take action. I have to actually change it. So this is the troubleshooting checklist with one time and each time. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time now to add another element to your wrapper. Give this a try and see if you can figure out how to set this up. See if you can figure out how to add an option for a staff headshot photo just below the signature, as you can see in this screenshot here. And so I'm going to, you can go ahead and pause and then see how you're doing, and then I'll show you the answer. So let's take a look at how we did that. So first we create the custom mailing field, and most importantly, the field type here is a web image URL. That's going to allow us to upload our images directly from the Compose screen or browse for images that we've already uploaded. And here I've added a description that says display an image after the signature block. Next, we need to add the custom field that we just created to our wrapper. On the Edit Wrapper page, you can see that I've opened the Snippets menu. I've found my custom mailing fields, and I've chosen Staff Headshot. That added it right where my cursor was, and you can see it in line 146. Just putting the contents of the custom field isn't enough though, because if I want this image to show up, I need to wrap it in an HTML image tag. I'm also setting the width and the height, so here's an important piece. I'm only showing this image if I've defined a staff headshot. Otherwise, I would see a broken image link, and I certainly don't want that. So now, once I've made sure that I'm using the correct mailing wrapper, the one I just edited, I'm going to add the custom mailing field, staff headshot, and then choose my image. And that's how it's done. Now that we know how to edit our wrappers and add new fields and functionality, I want to show you some common layouts for your mailings and different elements that you might want to add in. Here are a handful of common mailing layouts used at some point by different ActionKit clients, and we're including this as a way of giving you ideas for different ways that you can lay out your emails. And here are a few other layout elements. This is also a good time to cover all of the different types of custom mailing fields that you can have. Each of these custom mailing field types has a different way that you would input it on the Compose screen. So for example, you could upload an image with web image URL. We also saw the difference between signature, which uses text, and references, which uses HTML. But you have a lot of different options. For example, the text, also allows you to have, just plain text input, and you can set a max length if you want. Select from list gives you a drop-down menu. Select from list with other gives you a drop-down menu plus an other choice that gives you a little text input if you wanted. The integer will only accept numbers, and you can press up or down to increase or decrease the value. HTML will, we saw with the references, allows you to add in HTML. The web address URL allows you to put a link. The image address URL is similar, but allows you to find those images with thumbnails, which is really nice, from your media library. Or you could also enter in a web address. The color hex code allows you to provide a color picker so that you can choose a color. And the date allows you to choose like a calendar widget to enter date in the proper format. Similarly, time will provide you a calendar and a time widget. So depending on the type of field you select, there are validation options. This is more of an advanced thing. I'm not going to cover it, but I just wanted to raise it as a possibility. This is something that you could do. Here you could set a default, or you could validate it with a regular expression, which is a pretty advanced thing, or you could set a maximum length. So a couple of ideas for things that you could do would be to choose the Take Action button color with a color custom field. You could make it really easy to swap out your organization's logo or disclaimer based on, is this a C3 mailing, or is it a C4 mailing, or is it a pack mailing, by using the Select from List field. You could create a pull quote section with an HTML field. There are so many different things that you could do, all using one single wrapper, just making your changes with those custom fields. As a reminder from before, HTML for email is more limited than HTML for the web. Remember that this isn't an ActionKit limitation, it's an email client limitation. We've included some tips here, like for instance, you're going to use more inline CSS than you would if you were coding for the web. You should also be using width, height, and alt attributes for all of your images. You'll want to preview, proof, and test new wrappers and new custom fields with different email clients. There is a tool called Litmus that offers you a free trial so you can see what your emails look like on various email clients. And if you wanted to see the chart that I showed at the beginning of the training, there's the link here, and I'll also include that in the description of this video as well. So make sure you're always testing a new wrapper or any changes that you make to your wrapper with multiple email clients. Keep in mind things like many people view mailings with images blocked, so your mailing really should be visible even without images. And if you're coding for the web, you might normally use div tags and advanced CSS, but you might need to use tables in email to make it look right on many email clients. So that is this training, and here is the link to the slides, and I'm also going to add this link to the description as well. Thank you everyone, and I hope you found this useful.